Good evening and welcome to this special interview. India's Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, joins us. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Subramanian. It's great to have you on NDTV. Sir, firstly, it's now been just over a week since the Finance Minister in a series of announcements added up to a 20 lakh crore package according to the government. The RBI Governor also announcing major repo rate cuts this Friday. Have you seen any real impact of these major announcements?
So as you yourself mentioned, Sonia, it's just been a week. I think we'll have to wait for just at least a few more days. The key aspects of the package that have been announced by the government includes significant support to the MSMEs, and especially to preserve employment, because MSMEs account for a large bulk of employment in India. Right. And with the new definition, which is less than 100 crore turnover, these account for almost 99% of all firms, because I'm speaking from the data that we have from the tax returns, by corporate filers. Less than 75 crore turnover firms actually account for 98% of all filers in that category. So 100 crore turnover, less than that accounts for almost greater than 98%. And we know very well that firms that don't file or are not in the formal sector are typically smaller than this. So with the 100 crore turnover, almost 99% of the firms are covered. And by taking care of their liquidity problems, what we focused on is to ensure that the employment effects are kept to a minimum. Right. And that's the primary aspect on the demand as well.
These are extremely challenging times globally. We've seen reports already of various countries going into recession. Now, ratings agency CRISIL has just come out with a report saying that India is now in its fourth recession, the first since liberalization. Would you agree that India is now officially in a recession?
See, as you again preambled very well with your question, these are extremely uncertain times. I don't think any of us will recall having lived through a period like this before in our lifetimes. And in fact, if you look at it in terms of the magnitude of the pandemic, I guess the only pandemic that comes close is the one that happened more than a century back, which is the Spanish flu episode of 1918. So all economies are actually facing difficulties, and it's the economic aspects are manifesting because there is a need for the health response, which is the various economies coming up with measures to ensure social distancing, and that's why the economy is getting impacted. So I think we have to keep that perspective.
Absolutely, and it's an extremely tough job to balance the health issues, saving lives, with the economic issues, which are also, in a sense, threatening lives and livelihoods. Because as the RBI governor put it, he said, and this was, I think, perhaps the most frank statement from, well, not the government, but a major regulator, saying that we are now going to see negative growth. Do you agree with that assessment? And he also felt that inflationary pressures are actually going to go up. You've had a slightly different view from that. What do you feel on, first, the negative growth that India is heading into?
Sonia, here I think I would like to mention that, all of us are living through a period of extreme uncertainty. Let's just rewind back and, go back to, let's say, the first week of January or second week of January. I can't, recount a single economist or an analyst who could have actually predicted that we will basically have these kind of economic outcomes. So this entire aspect of looking into the future, this crystal ball gazing, I've always believed is a hard enough thing even in normal times. In abnormal times like these, I think it becomes even more difficult. And just to use a technical aspect, when if you sort of try to explain growth, we economists use this term called R squared, which is the percentage of the phenomenon that you can explain. Typically, none of these growth regressions, you can get an R squared even close to 50%. In other words, 50% of the phenomenon is not explained. The point I'm trying to make is that there's actually a lot more beyond what you can explain. And so there is uncertainty even in normal times. In uncertain times like these, it's very hard. So all I will say is, whether it's my projection or any other person's projection, it needs to be taken into account with all the caveats with which we say. And oftentimes what happens is that the baseline number is just paid attention to, but with all the nuance that is actually surrounded on that prediction about the uncertainty oftentimes gets lost. I think it, at least in times like this, is really critical, whether it's the governor's statement or my own estimate or the World Economic Outlook's estimates. I think we would do well, all viewers, to actually take that, not ignore the nuance that comes with the baseline. Even for instance, if you take the RBI, this thing itself, they're basically saying that Q2, the second half actually may be better. But, I think we basically oftentimes just pick up the headline and lose that nuance, I think, which is not a good thing to do, especially in uncertain times like these.
So, given all the safeguards, the caveats, as you put it, what is your estimate or projection? I'm not asking for the next 6 months, but say taking the first 3 months as the most difficult, the next 3 months as the most difficult, what would be your estimate looking ahead at India's economic forecast?
See, before I actually tell you that, I think there are a couple of important aspects that I want to highlight, and this is something I have consistently maintained. First, research now in behavioral economics and Nobel Prize winning work highlights what is called saliency bias, which is the fact that, we pay a lot more attention to recent evidence. For instance, when we are in normal times, none of us factor in the possibility that we may actually hit a black swan event. And when we are in a black swan event, then we keep thinking that the black swan event is going to continue and that we will not be back to normal times anytime soon. The point I'm trying to make here is that we tend to be, excessively pessimistic, especially when we are in a, black swan event. So that's number one, something that needs to be kept in mind. It's possible. I'm actually not, ruling out. It's possible that, estimations by others may be excessively pessimistic, much like, they may think that I actually am maybe being, optimistic in expecting a V-shaped recovery. So these are aspects that we have to be, keep in mind. Second point being that, I spoke about the Spanish flu episode of 100 years back, which was a far more devastating, episode, because about 10% of the population, 1/3 of the population was infected. Today, with COVID, less than 1% is infected, so about 33 times higher. The mortality rate was about 10%. Globally, mortality rate now with COVID is about 3.4%. So mortality rate was 3 times higher. And yet, the Spanish flu episode was a V-shaped recovery. So if you were to actually not get taken by saliency bias, and you look at some relevant evidence, then it seems that that's a reasonable guesstimate to make. I'm using the word guesstimate because that's all that we can provide. So I would say that it's possible that the second half may be better, and we'll have to wait and watch for the actual numbers.
Right. So that's an interesting perspective. And in fact, because taking from what you've said, these are unprecedented times. It is a black swan event. In that sense, the solutions perhaps also need to come out of what normal, say, government responses or political responses are at a time like this. Now, we've seen suggestion after suggestion coming to the government. A former chief economic advisor, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, has said this is too big for just the government to handle. Why don't you take more talent, even from ex-BJP finance ministers, from opposition leaders? You've had the ex-finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, say, why not actually have a new budget on June the 1st? Because your earlier budget, in a sense, isn't relevant anymore, given what's happened. Now, you've had opposition leader Rahul Gandhi today make the point that you're lifting a lockdown when cases are rising. Put cash into the hands now of those who need it the most. And Amartya Sen, Abhijit Banerjee, Raghuram Rajan authoring a paper saying put cash transfers are needed immediately. What's your take on all these suggestions? And perhaps the government should have a national kind of consensus, or look at building consensus with various experts on the government's response?
So, Sonia, actually, I think, asked 3 or 4 questions in that. Let me try and answer, one by one. Firstly, with respect to this new budget, as I've been saying, there is significant uncertainty. Look, an estimate that we may make, let's say, this month, and come next month, actually, we may have to recalibrate it. So, pushed to the extreme, things may, suppose a budget is presented, let's say, just as a conceptual thought, a thought experiment is presented, let's say, this month or in the month of June. Numbers change come July. Will you present another budget? So will you actually have then, in the remaining 10 months, another 10 budgets? I think the point being that there is significant uncertainty. So whatever, you basically end up coming up with will have to be recalibrated. And the other point is, in India, the policy making happens outside the budget as well. For instance, the corporate tax rate cut happened actually, outside the budget. There are a bunch of reforms. We don't necessarily wait for budgets to actually to do what it takes, and that's what the government has done. Come up with this package, actually including a bunch of reforms as well, which I actually think about as second generation reforms. Now, your second point about overall in terms of the economic, one aspect I think which needs to be kept in mind, which is what we economists actually, the jargon we use for that is called the precautionary motive to save. It's just sort of a bunch of words for something as simple as the fact that, people will, in uncertain times like these, will not necessarily make very lumpy expenditures, So for instance, think about buying a car, a big car, or let's say investing in a house. Those are lumpy investments. People will be wary because it's like, not just saving for a rainy day, but also we don't know when the rainy day will end, metaphorically. So because of this uncertainty, and this uncertainty, which is not economic, but actually is from a health side, the pandemic, there will be a natural response on the part of all individuals, whether it's firms or, retail consumers, to basically cut down on discretionary spending. I'll give you a very interesting example. Walmart, for instance, has just, they've revealed that sale of tops, basically of theirs, are far more than the sale of bottoms, and that's because people are working from home, and all you look at actually is the top. So the point being that a lot of discretionary expenditure is being cut down.
Right, but when we talk about cash transfers,
and
I think
that is something that leads to a demand side impact.
No, but when the opposition is talking about cash transfers, they are talking more about the fact that this is to prevent actual hunger of people who can't afford to buy food anymore because they haven't got wages. So in that sense, it's not discretionary spending; it's absolutely essential spending.
So on that, I was actually going to come to it. So apart from the the cash transfers of about 500 rupees that was done in the end of March, immediately when the lockdown was done. Also, the cereals basically was increased by 5 kilograms per individual and 1 kilogram pulses per family. So, the NFSA anywhere requires 35 kilograms per household. Let's take a household of 5 individuals, that translates into 25 kilograms additional. That's 60 kilograms for the households, right? So, the provision has been made for providing food for them, which is basically the essential item, and the cash transfer. I'll provide you also an interesting bit of, of data, as I was telling you about this precautionary savings to, motive to save. If you look at the PMJDY balances, and we all know in India that PMJDY accounts are basically accessed primarily by poor people.
Yes.
And there's research also showing that these people, after they've had these PMJDY accounts, they actually use these far more than those, than sort of control set of bank accounts. And what you notice there is, and I have been looking at this very carefully. During the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, the balances in the PMJDY accounts went up by 14,000 crores. And has then in the 4th and 5th week, it came down a little bit, but still net balances in the PMJDY accounts have gone up substantially. If you take about 35 to 40 crore accounts on this, an average increase of about 400 rupees on.
So you're saying that at the moment that even in the accounts, which in a sense are the accounts for the poorest of the poor, you're saying that there is actually cash, but of course, one of the big, and I think really you talked the second wave of reform. So if you're looking for another 1991 moment, perhaps this is the time to do it. Isn't the biggest reform surely, given what we've seen that our urban centers are major COVID centers now, that's where we had the informal sector, 80% of India's labor in the informal sector who've been hit the hardest. Isn't that where we need to completely reinvent what we are doing for them even now as people are trying their best to get home in whatever way is possible? So in that sense, For an economist, these figures may add up by saying there's more money in their bank accounts, but on the ground, the reality looks very, very different.
No, I think, Sonia, it's important to keep in mind here that the overall migrant labor in the country is of the order of about 20 to 25 million people. So that's I think a perspective that we keep in mind. Of course, there's no question that the vulnerabilities that the migrant laborers face because they don't have access to the PDS system, for instance, because they can only access it where they were, their ration card is actually is there, and that's where from a more long term way of taking care of this vulnerability, the one nation, one ration card will make a big difference. The 2 months of free rations that has been announced now will also help in that. But I actually have a bigger point to make, and which is that the migrant labor problem in India is actually a manifestation of the fact that there is a significant chunk of the labor force that is in the informal sector. About 90%, actually 89% to be precise. And that has happened because of the way we've actually kept our laws, especially, some of the restrictive aspects which, don't generate enough formal sector jobs. So this is not a recent phenomenon. The migrant labor phenomenon is a subset of the huge workforce in the informal sector. And the second generation reforms that are being launched now, Sonia, let me finish that point. The second generation reforms will make a big impact in actually formalizing, generating that workforce. For instance, let's take just agriculture, right? The APMC and the Essential Commodities Act. Because of the APMC, it's a small and marginal farmer who could not go and sell the produce to where he wanted and thereby actually generate enough reward for his produce. Across time, over the last 7 decades, people have spoken about small and marginal farmers, but this is the first time that when there is actually an effort to try and give that farmer the option by doing these reforms in the APMC. And this, by the way, is important, not just for independent India, but since the time centuries old, actually. So these are aspects that will really help at the bottom of the pyramid.
So, but when we talk also of the bottom of the pyramid, when we just talk of the kind of reforms needed, is it time to actually look at now how to restart India in a sense that how do we actually throw earlier solutions or earlier ways of thinking out of the window, as you put it, even with the APMC and liberalizing farming sector? Should we at this point forget about the fiscal deficit? Should we be printing more currency? What are the other out-of-box solutions that the government is actually looking at? Can we look at printing more currency? Is that a solution, or any other options that the government is looking at right now?
So this is, one of the aspects that we typically, are taught when we are when we do our PhDs in economics, is that it makes a lot of sense to try innovative ideas, in microeconomics, but macroeconomics is generally, because macro has such sort of, and what we typically economists think about it in terms of general equilibrium, which is, in other words, there are many moving parts in when we think about macroeconomics. So, as an economist, I tend to be far more careful about basically, macroeconomics, because, just to give one example, in the Great Depression, for instance, there was this attempt to try and reduce wages, basically. But what it did is it actually, pushed down demand and thereby exacerbated that problem. This is the general equilibrium argument. So, Sonia, I would actually be more conservative with macroeconomics. Yes, we need to think about all the solutions that are coming in, and we are thinking about it. But, between micro and macro, it's always a better idea to try more innovative things on the micro. For instance, the APMC reforms, those are actually primarily at the micro level because it benefits the small marginal farmer. But at the macro level, I think the fundamental principles actually need to be, applied in thinking about these. And I would be a little bit more conservative in thinking about cute aspects. That is not to say that, these options are not being considered. All of them have to be thought very carefully and considered, and then, the decision arrived at.
Well, the Prime Minister in his address also said that we should look also at how we can convert crisis into opportunity. He was talking about, of course, India manufacturing PPEs from zero to the second largest. But did we waste an opportunity perhaps when we announced that 10% of GDP, 20 lakh crore package, which the Prime Minister had said, but when it came down to the details, and this has been by various brokerage agencies and banks who have broken it up, is it actually just about 1% of the GDP? You've had Congress President Sonia Gandhi say it was a cruel joke on the people of the country. Has an opportunity been wasted for the government to actually get the economy kick-started again?
So, two sets of responses on that. First, I have always believed that we should be utilizing, crises and convert it into opportunity. If we look back at, at what has been done now, the second generation reforms that have been launched, I already spoke about agriculture. The Essential Commodities Act, major changes to that, something that we had covered in the economic survey, showing that these stock limits really do not make much of a difference. If anything, it actually just provides opportunities for rent seeking, at the lower level, and that's being corrected. A bunch of reforms on the mining sector, especially coal, for instance, product market, reforms being done. Tariff changes actually in power sector, which will basically, affect the cost of production for companies, bring in investment and thereby create jobs in the formal sector. Factor market reforms and land, labor, these are, if this is not, really going and converting crisis into an opportunity, what is, Sonia? I think you have to keep that in mind. Now to, respond to the aspect about the package itself. See, this is something, and my office has looked at this in great detail, and that is why even before the package came out, I had been saying that let's look at these numbers very carefully. And when we look at these numbers carefully, what you find is different countries have used different combinations of fiscal, monetary, and liquidity measures together with forbearance, depending on where they had greater space. Eventually, as Deng Xiaoping used to say, I don't care about the color of the cat as long as it goes and catches mice. At the same point, I would say, as long as we are providing liquidity to companies to ensure that actually supply side disruptions from this temporary shock are minimized, we provide them liquidity. The Reserve Bank also does that. Together, when we actually ensure that the impact on employment is minimal, how we do it is basically like the color of the cat. I only care about will it go and catch the mice, which is ensure that the temporary shock here does not create permanent damages on the supply side, and thereby the demand side also through employment. I think, and this is a very important point, that when people talk about it, people oftentimes just think about supply and demand in isolation, but there are interdependencies between the two. If you think about this counterfactual, suppose firms are not supported, MSMEs are not supported, they have to actually incur their fixed costs, their revenues have gone down, they will have to cut their variable costs and therefore retrench employees. If employees are retrenched, then there will be significant impact on demand, even for essential commodities. And that will have a significant impact on demand. So by ensuring that employment impacts are minimized, we've also taken care of the demand through the supply side. So, just to summarize, then the 10% is a combination of liquidities, fiscal, monetary, and forbearance measures. And where space is greater, we've utilized that.
Absolutely, and I think Dr. Subramanian, that is going to be the major challenge. I don't think it's an either-or situation. It's how you'll also look at all sectors. But of course, finally, the big challenge remains that as we talk about economics, we can't ignore the fact that at the moment, India is nowhere near flattening the curve. Dr. Guleria of AIIMS estimates that that would come towards the end of June, early July. How are we going to look at economic restructuring, kick-starting? We are opening up at a time when cases are rising. Does that make any logical sense? And also when India's main commercial centers, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, topping the list, are facing the biggest brunt of fighting the coronavirus?
So, Sonia, here I think there are 2 points that are very important to keep in mind. First, that, for a country of close to 1.4 billion people, and especially people, at the bottom of the pyramid, people who stay in such close proximity, where social distancing is so difficult, the number of cases we have are actually a minuscule. And even if you look at it in terms of the mortality and the recovery rates are about 42% now. So while there are about 1.3 lakh cases, we also have about close to 75,000 odd actually people recovering too, and the mortality rate is low. So that's point number one in terms of, so have that perspective. Second, and this is something which, only a policy maker can try and sort of, argue for, which is you have to look at the counterfactual. If we had not done the lockdown, and that counterfactual is something that people don't get to see actually manifesting, you have to ask the question, what if? What if we had not put down this lockdown? The R0 parameter, which captures, what is the number of infections that an infected person creates. Right. For COVID, it is about 2.3. If you just take that number and estimate, which is what a lot of studies, including the ISI and others, have done, those are just not just numbers are important because it gives you an estimate of what if. If we had not done the lockdown, and this was covered as well, we may have had about 70,000 deaths and tens of lakhs of cases. Right. So in order to, and this is something that we economists always look at, which is the impact of a policy has to be examined by looking at the what if scenario. Compared to that, we actually are doing really much better. It has given us space also to create infrastructure, the PPEs, the mask, all that actually we've generated time. Absolutely. That's the important point to keep in mind, that this is not something, and I don't care about the politics of it. From an economic perspective, it has generated enormous benefits by looking at the counterfactual. And now we actually, having learned, every citizen in the country now has understood the importance of social distancing, and people are wearing masks. Actually, even compared to 4-5 weeks back, everybody is wearing it. So the consciousness about it has come in. So I think it's the right time to also start taking measures to basically relax it and thereby let the economy prosper.
India's Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Subramanian, thank you so much for joining us on NDTV, and thanks so much for the government's and your perspective. Thank you.
My pleasure.